Bar problem number 1. While boarding a crowded public utility bus during the morning rush, Pedro discovered that his mobile phone was missing from his pocket. Moments later, he saw Ramon holding the phone and showing it to Luis. Pedro immediately grabbed the phone while accusing them of stealing it. Ramon explained that he merely found the phone on the ground near the bus after the commotion caused by passengers rushing to board and intended to turn it over. Despite this explanation, the regional trial court convicted Ramon and Luis of simple theft by relying on the disputable presumption that a person found in possession of property recently taken in a wrongful act is presumed to be the taker and the perpetrator of the entire offense. Was the trial court correct in applying the presumption? Explain.
Suggested answer: no. The presumption does not apply where possession is satisfactorily explained or is not shown to be exclusive and connected with the alleged wrongful taking. The rules on evidence provides that the disputable presumption that a person found in possession of property recently taken in a wrongful act is the taker applies only when the possession is unexplained by any innocent origin, is fairly recent, and is exclusive. Mere possession, standing alone, is insufficient to sustain a conviction absent other circumstances linking the accused to the unlawful taking. Here, Ramon plausibly explained that he found the phone on the ground after the rush of passengers, a version consistent with the possibility that the owner accidentally dropped it during the commotion. Moreover, no evidence established that Ramon was near the victim at the time the phone disappeared or that his possession was the product of the alleged theft. Accordingly, the trial court erred in applying the disputable presumption, and possession alone cannot justify a conviction for theft.
Bar problem number 2. Maria sued XYZ Corporation and its directors, including Daniel and Roberto, to recover the amount due under a promissory note. The regional trial court held the corporation and all the directors solidarily liable for the obligation. Only XYZ Corporation and Roberto appealed the decision. On appeal, the Court of Appeals reduced the amount of damages and monetary liability adjudged against the appellants. Daniel did not appeal and allowed the trial court's judgment to become final as to him. May Daniel nevertheless benefit from the appellate court's reduction of liability? Explain.
Suggested answer: yes. A non-appealing solidary co-debtor may benefit from the appellate court's decision reducing the common liability when the rights and obligations of the parties are inseparable. The Rules of Court provides that as a general rule, a judgment on appeal benefits only the appealing parties. However, an exception exists when the rights and liabilities of the appealing and non-appealing parties are so interwoven and dependent upon each other that a reversal or modification as to one necessarily affects the others, particularly where the parties are solidarily liable for the same obligation. Here, Daniel and the appealing defendants were adjudged solidarily liable for the same debt arising from the promissory note. Since the appellate court reduced the common monetary liability, limiting the benefit only to the appealing parties would result in inconsistent and inequitable obligations among solidary debtors for the same indebtedness. Accordingly, Daniel may likewise benefit from the appellate court's reduction of the solidary liability, despite not having appealed the trial court's judgment.
Bar problem number 3. Pedro executed a will naming certain heirs and initially filed a petition for its probate. He later withdrew the petition, claiming that he had revoked the will, and thereafter executed a new will favoring different beneficiaries. Pedro then filed a second petition for probate, but deliberately failed to disclose the addresses of his compulsory heirs despite knowing where they resided. Consequently, the heirs were never notified of the probate proceedings. The regional trial court admitted the second will to probate, issued letters testamentary, and the estate was distributed. Several years later, the omitted heirs learned of the proceedings after the judgment had already become final and executory. Having lost the opportunity to oppose the probate because they were never notified, they filed a petition for annulment of judgment under Rule 47 of the Rules of Court. Is denial of due process a recognized ground for annulment of judgment? Explain.
Suggested answer: Yes, denial of due process is a recognized ground for annulment of judgment under Rule 47 of the Rules of Court. The Rules of Court provide that a petition for annulment of judgment may be availed of when the ordinary remedies of new trial, appeal, petition for relief, or other appropriate remedies are no longer available through no fault of the petitioner on the grounds of extrinsic fraud or lack of jurisdiction. Jurisprudence has likewise recognized denial of due process as an additional ground because a judgment rendered without affording a party the opportunity to be heard is fundamentally voidable. Here, the omitted heirs were not notified of the probate proceedings despite the petitioner's knowledge of their addresses, thereby depriving them of the opportunity to oppose the probate and protect their hereditary rights. Since the judgment had already become final before they learned of the proceedings and the loss of ordinary remedies was not attributable to them, a petition for annulment of judgment is a proper remedy. Accordingly, denial of due process is a valid ground for the annulment of judgment under Rule 47 of the Rules of Court.
Bar problem number 4. Maria filed an action for quieting of title, cancellation of an original certificate of title, and declaration of nullity of a tax declaration involving a parcel of land. The defendant, Daniel, had permanently relocated to the United States and could no longer be personally served with summons in the Philippines. Upon motion, the regional trial court authorized extraterritorial service of summons by publication. Maria caused the summons to be published in a newspaper of general circulation, but failed to mail a copy of the summons to Daniel's address abroad, sending it instead to his last known Philippine address. Daniel later questioned the validity of the extraterritorial service of summons. Was the use of extraterritorial service proper? Explain. Suggested answer: yes. Extraterritorial service of summons was a proper mode of service because the action is quasi in rem and the defendant was a non-resident not found in the Philippines. The rules of court provide that when the defendant is a non-resident who is not found in the Philippines and the action affects the defendant's interest in property located within the Philippines, summons may be served extraterritorially with leave of court. Jurisprudence recognizes actions for quieting of title and cancellation of certificates of title as proceedings quasi in rem, since they seek to determine interests in specific property rather than impose personal liability. Here, Daniel was residing abroad, and the action sought to determine his claimed interest over the parcel of land situated in the Philippines. Accordingly, the trial court correctly authorized extraterritorial service of summons because the nature of the action falls within those where such mode of service is allowed. Accordingly, the use of extraterritorial service of summons on Daniel was proper.
Bar problem number 5. XYZ Corporation filed an unlawful detainer case against several occupants before the municipal trial court, which rendered judgment ordering the defendants to vacate the premises. On appeal, the regional trial court affirmed the trial court's decision in its entirety. The corporation then moved for the immediate execution of the RTC judgment despite the defendant's intention to further appeal. The RTC denied the motion, ruling that execution pending appeal is discretionary and may be granted only upon a showing of good reasons. The corporation questioned the denial through a petition for certiorari. Was the RTC correct in denying the motion for execution pending appeal? Explain.
Suggested answer: no. The RTC erred because its judgment in an unlawful detainer case is immediately executory by express provision of the Rules of Court. The Rules on Summary Procedure and Rule 70 of the Rules of Court provide that the judgment of the regional trial court in forcible entry and unlawful detainer cases shall be immediately executory without prejudice to a further appeal. Jurisprudence recognizes that the issuance of a writ of execution under these circumstances is a ministerial duty of the RTC and does not depend on the existence of good reasons, which are required only in cases of discretionary execution. Here, after affirming the judgment in the unlawful detainer case, the RTC was duty-bound to order its immediate execution, notwithstanding the defendant's intended further appeal. By requiring the prevailing party to establish good reasons before execution could issue, the RTC applied the rule governing discretionary execution instead of the mandatory rule applicable to ejectment cases. Accordingly, the RTC incorrectly denied the motion for immediate execution pending further appeal.
Bar problem number 6. Pedro received a copy of a decision of a quasi-judicial agency denying his motion for reconsideration and timely filed a petition for review under Rule 43 of the Rules of Court before the Court of Appeals. The petition contained a duly notarized verification and certification against forum shopping. However, the Court of Appeals dismissed the petition on the ground that Pedro failed to attach a photocopy of the identification card he presented to the notary public as proof of his identity. The appellate court ruled that the omission rendered the verification fatally defective. Was the dismissal proper? Explain.
Suggested answer: no. The Court of Appeals erred in dismissing the petition solely because no photocopy of the affiant's identification card was attached. The Rules of Court does not require that a photocopy of the competent evidence of identity presented to the notary public be attached to a petition filed under Rule 43. Moreover, verification is merely a formal, not jurisdictional requirement, and defects therein do not automatically warrant the dismissal of the petition where substantial compliance exists and the ends of justice would be better served by allowing its correction. Here, the petition contained a duly notarized verification and certification against forum shopping, and the omission involved only the non-attachment of a photocopy of the identification card presented to the notary. Such procedural lapse neither affects the court's jurisdiction nor renders the petition fatally defective. Accordingly, the Court of Appeals should not have dismissed the petition on the ground that competent evidence of identity was not attached to the verification.
Bar problem number 7. After the death of spouses Pedro and Maria, their heirs, acting through an attorney-in-fact, entered into a contract to sell a parcel of land belonging to the spouse's undivided estate for $25 million. At the time the contract was executed, no interstate proceedings had been commenced and no administrator of the estate had been appointed. The buyer made several installment payments, which the heirs accepted. Later, however, the heirs refused to receive the remaining balance, claiming that the buyer had failed to pay within the period agreed upon in the contract. The buyer then filed an action for specific performance. The heirs moved to dismiss the complaint, arguing that the administrator of the decedent's estate was an indispensable party whose non-joinder rendered the action defective. No administrator had, however, been appointed by any probate court. Does the non-joinder of the administrator render the judgment void? Explain.
Suggested answer: no. The non-joinder of a non-existent administrator does not render the judgment void. The rules of court and jurisprudence provide that only an indispensable party whose legal existence and interest in the litigation are established must be joined in the action. An administrator acquires authority over a decedent's estate only upon appointment by the proper probate court through the issuance of letters of administration or letters testamentary. Here, no intestate or probate proceedings had been commenced, and no administrator had been appointed when the action for specific performance was filed. Since no administrator legally existed at the time, there was no such indispensable party whose non-joinder could affect the validity of the proceedings or the judgment. Accordingly, the absence of a non-existent administrator does not render the judgment void.
Bar problem number 8. Several registered voters from a province filed a petition before the Commission on Elections seeking a manual recount of all votes cast in the most recent national and local elections, claiming that the speed of the electronic canvassing made the results highly suspicious. After the Commission denied their petition, they filed a petition for certiorari and mandamus before the Supreme Court. They asserted that the case was a class suit because they represented all voters in the province who were allegedly too numerous to be joined individually. However, the petition did not contain the signatures of the supposed representatives or any showing that they were sufficiently numerous and representative of the class they claimed to represent. Was the petition properly considered a class suit? Explain. Suggested answer: no. The petition was not properly classified as a class suit. The Rules of Court provides that a class suit may be maintained only when the subject matter is of common or general interest to numerous persons. The parties are so numerous that it is impracticable to implead them all, and the representative parties are sufficiently numerous and capable of fully protecting the interests of the entire class. The court must be able to verify that these requisites are present before a case may proceed as a class suit. Here, the petitioners failed to submit the signature pages or other competent proof showing who the representative parties were or that they adequately represented the purported class of voters. In the absence of such verification, the court could not determine whether the requirements for a class suit had been satisfied. Accordingly, the petition could not be treated as a class suit.
Bar problem number 9. XYZ Corporation obtained a loan from a government financial institution and subsequently relent the proceeds to ABC Manufacturing, Inc. As continuing security for the loan, ABC executed a mortgage trust indenture over several of its properties, designating XYZ as trustee for the benefit of the lenders. Later, XYZ assigned all its rights under the mortgage trust indenture to DEF Finance Corporation. After ABC defaulted on its loan obligations, DEF initiated foreclosure proceedings and filed a petition before the regional trial court seeking its appointment as trustee, pursuant to a provision in the mortgage trust indenture authorizing any lender to apply for the appointment of a replacement trustee in case of vacancy. ABC moved to dismiss the petition, arguing that the RTC lacked jurisdiction because the controversy involved property and a monetary obligation. Does the RTC have jurisdiction over the petition for appointment of trustee? Explain.
Suggested answer: yes. The regional trial court has jurisdiction over the petition because it involves an action incapable of pecuniary estimation. Batas Panbansa, Bilg 129, provides that regional trial courts have exclusive original jurisdiction over civil actions in which the subject matter is incapable of pecuniary estimation. The test is the nature of the principal relief sought. If the principal relief is neither the recovery of money nor the recovery of real property, the action is deemed incapable of pecuniary estimation, even though monetary or property rights may be affected as a consequence. Here, the principal relief sought is the judicial appointment of a trustee under the mortgage trust indenture, not the recovery of the loan proceeds or the ownership or possession of the mortgaged properties. Any effect on the party's monetary or property rights is merely incidental to the determination of the proper trustee. Accordingly, the regional trial court has jurisdiction over the petition for appointment of trustee. Bar problem number 10. Several individuals were charged under the Omnibus Election Code for allegedly campaigning within a polling place on Election Day by soliciting votes from voters while inside the polling precinct. They moved to quash the information, arguing that it was duplicitous because it charged them with both unlawful electioneering and unlawful presence in the polling place in a single information. The prosecution maintained that the accused's presence inside the polling place was merely an element of the offense of unlawful electioneering committed therein. Should the information be quashed for charging more than one offense? Explain.
No. The information should not be quashed because it charges only one offense under the doctrine of absorption. The Rules of Criminal Procedure provides that an information is generally defective if it charges more than one offense. However, under the doctrine of absorption, when one act constitutes an inherent element of another offense or is committed solely in furtherance of the principal crime, the lesser offense is absorbed into the greater offense and is not treated as a separate crime. Here, the accused unlawful presence inside the polling place was indispensable to the commission of unlawful electioneering allegedly committed by soliciting votes within the polling precinct. Since the unlawful presence was merely an essential component of the principal offense and occurred simultaneously through the same act, it ceased to constitute a separate punishable offense.
Accordingly, the information is not duplicitous and should not be quashed for charging more than one offense.